Part 1. The Meaning of Political Economy. Chapter 7. The Knowledge Properly Called Science. Science is a word much abused just now, when all sorts of pretenders to special knowledge style themselves scientists, and all sorts of ill-verified speculations are called sciences. Yet it has a well-defined, proper meaning which may easily be kept in mind. In its proper and definite meaning, science is that knowledge by or in which phenomena are related to what we assume to be their cause, and called a law or laws of nature. With human laws, what is properly called science has nothing whatever to do, unless it be as phenomena which it subjects to examination in the effort to discover in natural law their cause. Thus, there may be a science of jurisprudence, or a science of legislation, as there may be a science of grammar, a science of language, or a science of the mental structure and its operations. But the object of such sciences, properly so called, is always to discover the laws of nature in which human laws, customs, and modes of thought originate. The natural laws which lie behind and permanently affect not merely all external manifestations of human will, but even the internal affections of that will itself. Human laws are made by man, and share in all his weaknesses and frailties. They must be enforced by penalties subsequent to and conditioned upon their violation. Unless accompanied by some penalty for its violation, no act of a legislative body or sovereign prince becomes law. Human laws are acknowledged only by man, and that not by all men in all times and places, but only by some men, that is, by men living in the time and place where the political power that imposes them has the ability to enforce their sanctions, and not even by all of these men, but generally by only a very small part of them. Limited to the circumscribed areas which we call political divisions, they are even there, constantly fluctuating and changing. Natural laws, on the other hand, belong to the natural order of things. They have no sanctions in the sense of penalties imposed upon their violation, and enforced subsequent to their violation. They cannot be violated. Man can no more resist or swerve natural law than he can build the world. Their sway extends not merely over and throughout the whole earth, of which we are constantly changing tenants, but over and through the whole system of which it is a part, and so far as either observation or reason can give us light, over and through the whole universe. I dwell again on the distinction between laws of nature and laws of man, because it is necessary, in beginning the study of political economy, that we should grasp it firmly and keep it clearly in mind. This necessity is the greater, since we shall find that in the accredited economic treatises, laws of nature and laws of man are confused together in what they call laws of political economy. It is not worthwhile to make many quotations to show the confusion that one may see by taking up the economic work approved by a college or university that first comes to hand. But that which passes in these institutions for the science of political economy may speak for itself. I shall make one quotation. I take for that purpose the best book I can find that puts into compact form the teachings of the scholastic economists. It is the Primer of Political Economy in 16 definitions and 40 propositions by Mason and Laylor. Their primer has been widely endorsed and largely used in institutions of learning. In this is the first of their 16 definitions, and their explanation of it.
Definition I. Political economy is the science which teaches the laws that regulate the production, distribution, and exchange of wealth. Everything in this world is governed by law. Human laws are those made by man. All others are natural laws. A law providing for the education of children in schools is a human law. The law that children shall keep growing, if they live, until they are men and women, and shall then slowly decay and at last die, is a natural law. An apple falls from a tree, and the earth moves around the sun in obedience to natural laws. The laws that regulate the production, distribution, and exchange of wealth are of both kinds. The more important ones, however, are natural.
In this, Messrs. Mason and Lalore aptly illustrate the essential difference between natural law and human law. But the way in which the two are mixed together as economic laws suggests the examination paper of the Philadelphia boy is more interested in hooking catfish and stoning frogs than in his lessons. To the question, "Name and describe nouns?" the answer was,
Nouns are 3 in number and sometimes more. There are proper nouns, common nouns, bloody nouns, and other nouns. Proper nouns are the properest nouns, but common nouns are the commonest. Bloody nouns are the big ones. Other nouns are no good. Noun, a name given by boys in Philadelphia to large bullfrogs.
Yet ridiculous as is this confusion of human law and natural law, and absurd as is a definition that leaves one to guess what is meant by laws, this little primer correctly gives what is to be found in the pretentious treatises it endeavors to condense. It is only with the implication that by law is meant natural law that we can say everything in this world is governed by law. To say, as the little summary of the scholastic political economy, from which I have quoted, says, that political economy is the science which teaches the laws, some of them natural laws and some of them human laws, which regulate the production, distribution, and exchange of wealth, is like saying that astronomy is a science which teaches the laws, some of them laws of matter and motion, and some of them bulls of popes and acts of parliament, which regulate the movements of stars and comets. The absurdity of this is not so strikingly obvious in the ponderous treatises from which it is derived as in this little primer, because their reader's attention is confused by their utter lack of logical arrangement, and distracted by the shoveling in on him, as it were, of great masses of irrelevant matter, which makes it a most difficult task to dig out what is really meant. A task usually abandoned by the ordinary reader with a secret feeling of shame at his own incapacity to follow such deep and learned men. The expositions of what passes for the science of political economy in our schools do indeed, for the most part, contain some things that really belong to science. But in their larger part, what properly belongs to science is, in the literature of political economy that has grown up since his time, confused and overlaid with what Turgot, over 100 years ago, spoke of as an art. The art, namely, of those who set themselves to darken things that are clear to the open mind. What this truly great Frenchman of the 18th century said is worth quoting, for it finds abundant and constant illustration in the writings of the professors of political economy of the 19th century, and especially in the latest of them.
This art consists in never beginning at the beginning, but in rushing into the subject in all its complications, or with some fact that is only an exception or some circumstance, isolated, far-fetched, or merely collateral, which does not belong to the essence of the question and goes for nothing in its solution. Like a geometer who treats of triangles should begin with white triangles as the simplest, in order to treat afterwards of blue triangles, then of red triangles, and so on.
If political economy is a science, and if not, it is hardly worth the while of earnest men to bother themselves with it, it must follow the rules of science, and seek in natural law the causes of the phenomena which it investigates. With human law, except as furnishing illustrations and supplying subjects for its investigation, it has, as I have already said, nothing whatever to do. It is concerned with the permanent, not with the transient, with the laws of nature, not with the laws of man. Chapter 8. The Meaning and Scope of Political Economy. Adam Smith, who at the close of the last century gave so powerful impulse to the study of what has since been called political economy, that he is, not without justice, spoken of as its father, entitled his great book An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, and what we call political economy, the Germans call national economy. No term is of importance if we rightly understand what it means, but, both in the term political economy and in that of national economy, as well as in the phrase wealth of nations, lurk suggestions which may and in fact often do interfere with a clear apprehension of the ground they properly cover. The use of the term political economy began at a time when the distinction between natural law and human law was not clearly made, when what I have called the body economic was largely confounded with what is properly the body politic, and when it was the common opinion in Europe, even of thoughtful men, that the production and distribution of wealth were to be regulated by the legislative action of the sovereign or state. The term was given currency by those French exponents of natural right or the natural order, who today may be best described as the first single-tax men. They used the term political economy to distinguish from politics the branch of knowledge with which they were concerned, and from this called themselves economists. The term is used by Adam Smith only in speaking of this sect, composed of a few men of great learning and ingenuity in France. But although these economists were overwhelmed and have been almost forgotten, yet of their noble and generous system this term remained, and since the time of Adam Smith it has come into general use as expressive of, to accept the most common and, I think, sufficient definition, that branch of knowledge that treats of the nature of wealth and the laws of its production and distribution. It is not with the body politic, but with that body social or body industrial that I have called the body economic, that political economy is directly concerned, not with the commonwealth of which man becomes a member by the attribution or acceptance of allegiance to a republic, but with the commonwealth of which he becomes a member by the fact that he lives in the state of society in which each does not attempt to satisfy all of his own material needs by his own direct efforts, but obtains the satisfaction of some of them at least through the cooperation of others. The fact of participation in this cooperation does not make him a citizen of any particular state. It makes him a civilized man, a member of the civilized world, a unit in that body economic to which political distinctions of states and nations have no more relation than distinctions of color have to distinctions of form. An economy of the economic unit would not be a political economy, and the laws of which it would treat would not be those with which political economy is concerned. They would be the laws of personal or family conduct. An economy of the individual or family could treat the production of wealth no further than related to the production of such a unit. And though it might take cognizance of the physical laws involved in its agriculture and mechanics, of the distribution of wealth in the economic sense, it could not treat at all, since any apportionment among the members of such a family of wealth obtained by it would be governed by the laws of individual or family life, and not by any law of the distribution of the results of socially conjoined effort. But when, in the natural course of human growth and development, economic units come into such relations that the satisfaction of material desires is sought by conjoined effort, the laws which political economy seeks to discover begin to appear. The system or arrangement that is the proper purpose of political economy to discover may be likened to that system or arrangement by which the physical body is nourished. The lowest unit of animal life, so far as we can see, is a single cell, which sucks in and assimilates its own food, thus directly satisfying what we may style its own desires. But in those highest forms of animal life of which man is a type, myriads of cells have become conjoined in related parts and organs, exercising different and complex functions, which result in the procurement, digestion, and assimilation of the food that, nourishing each separate cell, maintains the entire organism. Brain and stomach, hands and feet, eyes and ears, teeth and hair, bones, nerves, arteries and veins, still less the cells of which all these parts are composed, do not feed themselves. Under the government of the brain, what the hands, aided by the legs, assisted by the organs of sense, procure, is taken to the mouth, masticated by the teeth, taken by the throat to the alembic of the stomach, where aided by the intestines it is digested, and passing into a fluid containing all nutritive substances, is oxygenized by the lungs, and impelled by the pumping of the heart, makes a complete circuit of the body through a system of arteries and veins, in the course of which every part and every cell takes the nutriment it requires. Now, what the blood is to the physical body, wealth, as we shall hereafter see more fully, is to the body economic. And as we should find, were we to undertake it, that a description of the manner in which blood is produced and distributed in the physical body would involve almost, if not quite, the description of the entire physical man, with all his powers and functions. So we shall find that what is included in political economy is almost, if not quite, the whole body social, with all its parts, powers and functions, and laws under which they operate. The scope of political economy would be roughly explained were we to style it the science, which teaches how civilized men get a living. Why this idea is sufficiently expressed as the production and distribution of wealth will be more fully seen hereafter, but there is a distinction as to what is called getting a living that it may be worthwhile to note here. We have but to look at existing facts to see that there are two ways in which a man may obtain satisfaction of his material desires for things not freely supplied to him by nature. The first of these ways is by working or rendering service. The second is by stealing or extorting services. But there is only one way in which man, i.e., man in general or all men, can satisfy his material desires. That is, by working or rendering service. For it is manifestly impossible that man in general or all men, or indeed any but a small minority of men, can satisfy their material desires by stealing, since in the nature of things, working or the rendering of service is the only way in which the material satisfactions of desire can be primarily obtained or produced. Stealing produces nothing. It only alters the distribution of what has already been produced. Therefore, a true science of political economy takes no cognizance of stealing, except in so far as the various forms of it may pervert the natural distribution, and thus check the natural production of wealth. Nor does political economy concern itself with the character of the desires for which satisfaction is sought. It is, so to speak, like the science of navigation, which is concerned with the means whereby a ship may be carried from point to point on the ocean, but asks not whether that ship may be a pirate or a missionary bark, or what are the expectations which may induce its passengers to go from one place to another. Political economy is not a moral or ethical science, nor yet is it a political science. It is the science of the maintenance and nutriment of the body politic. Although it will be found incidentally to throw a most powerful light upon, and to give the most powerful support to, the teachings of moral or ethical science, its proper business is neither to explain the difference between right and wrong, nor to persuade to one in preference to the other. Chapter 9. The Elements of Political Economy. The complex phenomena of the production and distribution of wealth in the elaborate organization of modern civilization will only puzzle us, as the many confused and confusing books written to explain it show, if we began, as it were, from the middle. But if we seek first principles and trace out main lines, so as to comprehend the skeleton of their relation, they will readily become intelligible. To understand a complex machine, the best way is first to see what the beginning and the end of its movements are, leaving details until we have mastered its general idea and comprehended its purpose. In this way, we most easily see the relation of parts to each other and to the subject of the whole. When the safety bicycle was yet a curiosity even in the towns of England and the United States, an American missionary in a far-off station received from an old friend, unaccompanied by the letter intended to go with it, a present of one of these machines, which for economy and transportation had not been set up, but was forwarded in its unassembled parts. How these parts were to be put together was a perplexing problem, for neither the missionary himself nor anyone he could consult could at first imagine what the thing was intended to do, and their guesses were of almost anything but the truth, until at length the saddle suggested a theory, which was so successfully followed that by the time, months afterwards, another shipment brought the missing letter. The missionary was riding over the hard sand of the beach on his wheel. The immense aggregate of movements by which, in civilization, wealth is produced and distributed, viewed collectively as the subject of political economy, constitutes a system or arrangement much greater than, yet analogous to, the system or arrangement of a great factory. In the attempt to understand the laws of nature, which they illustrate and obey, let us avoid the confusion that inevitably attends beginning from the middle by proceeding in the way suggested in our illustration, the only scientific way. These movements, so various in their modes and so complex in their relations, with which political economy is concerned, evidently originate in the exertion of human will, prompted by desire. Their means are the material and forces that nature offers to man, and the natural laws which these obey. Their end and aim the satisfaction of man's material desires. If we try to call to mind as many as we can of the different movements that are included in the production and distribution of wealth in modern civilization, the catching and gathering, the separating and combining, the digging and planting, the baking and brewing, the weaving and dyeing, the sewing and washing, the sawing and planing, the melting and forging, the moving and transporting, the buying and selling, we shall see that what they all aim to accomplish is some sort of change in the place, form, or relation of the materials or forces supplied by nature so as to better satisfy human desire. Thus, the movements with which political economy is concerned are human actions, having for their aim the attainment of material satisfactions, and the laws that it is its province to discover are not the laws manifested in the existence of the materials and forces of nature that man thus utilizes, nor yet the laws which make possible their change in place, form, or relation, but the laws of man's own nature. The world, regarded from the standpoint of political economy, has for its original elements man and nature. Of these, the human element is the initiative or active factor, that which begins or acts first. The natural element is the passive factor, that which receives action and responds to it. From the interaction of these two proceed all with which political economy is concerned. Between the material things which come into existence through man's agency and those which come into existence through the agency of nature alone, the difference is as clear to human reason as the difference between a mountain and a pyramid. Whatever man makes must have for its substance pre-existing matter. Whatever motion he exerts must be drawn from a pre-existing stock of energy. Take away from man all that is contributed by external nature, and you have what? Something which has no form or substance or direct power in or over the material world, but which is yet the originating impulse that utilizes motion to mold matter into forms it desires, and to which we must look for the origin of the pyramid. We cannot really consider the beginning of things without seeing that when man came into the world, the sum of energy was not increased, nor that of matter added to, and so it must be today. In all the changes that man brings about in the material world, he adds nothing to and subtracts nothing from the sum of matter and energy. He merely brings about changes in the place and relation of what already exists, and the first and always indispensable condition to his doing anything in the material world and indeed to his very existence therein, is that of access to its material and forces. The steam engine rushing along with its long train of coal or goods or passengers is, in all that is evident to our senses, but a new form of what previously existed. Everything about it that we can see, hear, touch, taste, weigh, measure, or subject to chemical tests existed before man was. What has brought pre-existing matter and motion into the shape, place, and function of an engine and train is that which, imprisoned in the engineer's brain, grasps the throttle. The same thing that in the infant stretches for the moon, and in the child makes mud pies. It is this conscious will seeking the gratification of its desires in the alteration of material forms that is the primary motive power, the active factor, in bringing about the relations with which political economy deals, and this will can act only in certain ways, and is subject in that action to certain uniform sequences, which we term laws of nature. Chapter 10. The Fundamental Law of Political Economy. Desire is the prompter, and the satisfaction of desire is the end and aim of all human action. All that men seek to do, to obtain or to avoid, may be embraced in one term, as satisfactions of desire. But of these desires and their corresponding satisfactions, some are more primary or fundamental than others, and it is only as these desires obtain satisfaction that other desires arise and are felt. Thus, the desire for air is perhaps the most fundamental of all human desires. Yet its satisfaction is under normal conditions so easily had that we usually are not conscious of it. It is, in fact, rather a latent than an actual desire. But let one be shut off from air, and the desire to get it becomes at once the strongest of desires, casting out for the moment all others. So it is with other desires, such as those for food and drink, the satisfaction of which is necessary to the maintenance of life and health, and the avoidance of injury and pain, and which we share in common with the brute. These primary desires lie, as it were, beneath, or are fundamental to, the manifold desires which arise in man when they are satisfied. For, while the desires of other animals seem comparatively few and fixed, the desires of man are seemingly illimitable. He is indeed the never-satisfied animal, his desires under normal conditions growing with his power of satisfying them without assignable limit. Now, of human desires and their corresponding satisfactions, some may be subjective, that is, relating to the individual mind or thinking subject, and some objective, that is, relating to the external world, the object of its thought. And by another distinction, some may be said to be immaterial, that is, relating to things not cognizable by the senses, i.e., thought and feelings, and some to be material, that is, relating to things cognizable by the senses, i.e., matter and energy. In the order of human desires, what we call needs come first, and are of the widest importance. Desires that transcend the desires of the animal can arise and seek gratification only when the desires we share with other animals are satisfied. And those who are inclined to deem that branch of philosophy which is concerned with the gratification of material needs, and especially with the way in which men are fed, clothed, and sheltered, as a secondary and ignoble science, are like an architect who should deem the ornamentation of a façade more important than the laying of a foundation. The only way man has of satisfying his desires is by action. Now, action, if continued long enough in one line to become really exertion, a conscious putting forth of effort, produces in the consciousness a feeling of reluctance or weariness. This comes from something deeper than the exhaustion of energy in what we call physical labor. For whoever has tried it knows that one may lie on his back in the most comfortable position, and by mere dint of sustained thinking, without consciously moving a muscle, tire himself as truly as by sawing wood. and that the mere clash and conflict of the involuntary or undirected thought or feeling, or its continuance in one direction, will soon bring extreme weariness. But whatever be its ultimate cause, the fact is that labor, the attempt of the conscious will to realize its material desire, is always, when continued for a little while, in itself hard and irksome. And whether from this fact alone or from this fact, conjoined with or based upon something intuitive to our perceptions, the further fact, testified to both by observation of our own feelings and actions, and by observation of the acts of others, is that men always seek to gratify their desires with the least exertion. This, of course, does not mean that they always succeed in doing so, any more than the physical law that motion tends to persist in a straight line means that moving bodies always take that line. But it does mean the mental analog of the physical law that motion seeks the line of least resistance. That is, seeking to gratify their desires, men will always seek the way which under existing physical, social, and personal conditions seems to them to involve the least expenditure of exertion. This disposition of man is so universal and unfailing that it constitutes one of those invariable sequences that we denominate laws of nature, and from which we may safely reason. It is this law of nature that is the fundamental law of political economy. The central law from which its deductions and explanations may with certainty be drawn, and indeed, by which alone they become possible. It holds the same place in the sphere of political economy that the law of gravitation does in physics. Without it, there could be no recognition of order, and all would be chaos. Yet the failure clearly to apprehend this has led to very serious and widespread mistakes as to the nature of the science. For the principle that men always seek to satisfy their desires with the least exertion, there has been substituted the principle of human selfishness. And with the assumption that political economy takes into its account only the selfish feelings of human nature, there have been linked, as laws of political economy, other assumptions as destitute of validity. This presumption, that political economy must eliminate everything but the selfish feelings of mankind, has continued to pervade the accredited political economy up to this time. Whatever may have been the effects of the attacks made upon it by those who, not putting their objections into logical and coherent form, could be spoken of as its sentimentalists, but not political economists. Yet, however generally, the accepted writers on political economy may have themselves supposed the assumption of universal selfishness to be the fundamental principle of political economy, or how much ground they may have given for such a supposition on the part of their readers. A true political economy requires no such assumption. The primary postulate on and from which its whole structure is built is not that all men are governed only by selfish motives. It is that all men seek to gratify their desires, whatever those desires may be, with the least exertion. This fundamental law of political economy is, like all other laws of nature, so far as we are concerned, supreme. It is no more affected by the selfishness or unselfishness of our desires than is the law of gravitation. It is simply a fact. Chapter 11. Methods of Political Economy. The human reason has two ways of ascertaining truth. The first of these is that of reasoning from particulars to generals in an ascending line, until we come at last to one of those invariable uniformities that we call laws of nature. We call this method inductive or a posteriori. But when we have reached what we feel sure is a law of nature, and as such true in all times and places, then an easier and more powerful method of ascertaining truth is open to us. The method of reasoning in the descending line from generals to particulars. This is the method that we call the deductive, or a priori method. For knowing what the general law is, the invariable sequence that we call a law of nature, we have only to discover that a particular comes under it to know what is true in the case of that particular. In relation to priority, the two methods stand in the order in which I have named them. Induction being the first or primary method of applying human reason to the investigation of facts, and deduction being the second or derivative. So far as our reason is concerned, induction must give the facts on which we may proceed to deduction. Deduction can safely be based only on what has been supplied to the reason by induction, and where the validity of this first step is called in question, it must apply to induction for proof. Both methods are proper to the careful investigation that we speak of as scientific. Induction in its preliminary stages, when it is groping for the law of nature. Deduction when it has discovered that law, and is thus able to proceed by a shortcut from the general to the particular, without any further need for the more laborious and, so to speak, uphill method of induction, except to verify its conclusions. There is a further method of investigation which consists of a combination of these two original methods of reason, and which has been found most effective in the discovery of truth in the physical sciences. When our induction is so pointed to the existence of a natural law that we are able to form a surmise or suspicion of what it may prove to be, we may tentatively assume the existence of such a law, and proceed to see whether particulars will fall into place in deductions made from it. This is the method of tentative deduction or hypothesis, where the application of the inductive method was really needed in what is now called the new lights. The classical political economy was to test the premises from which its deductions were made, and to clear them of what had no better warrant than the disposition to use political economy to justify existing social arrangements. It was not needed to take the place of the deductive method, where that was applicable. For the deductive method, when applied to the further extension of what has already been validly ascertained, constitutes the most powerful means of extending knowledge that the human mind can avail itself of. In its use of the deductive method after its premises had been settled, the classical political economy was not in error. The error that gave insecurity to its whole structure lay deeper still, in the insufficient inductions on which those premises rested. But, instead of addressing themselves to these flaws in its accepted premises, the various schools of economists generally classed as inductive have denied that there were any general principles that could with certainty be laid down as the basis for deduction. Thus, if such a question were asked them, such as, does free trade or protection best promote the general prosperity? Or, what is the best system of land tenure? Or, what is the best system of taxation? Or, what are the limits of governmental interference with industry or trade union regulations? No general answer can be given. It can only be said that one thing may be best in one place and time, and another in another place and time, so that the matter can be determined only by special investigations. But to me it seems clear that if political economy can be called a science at all, it must, as a science, that is to say, from the moment the laws of nature on which it depends are discovered, follow the deductive method of examination, using induction only to test the conclusions thus obtained. For the particulars which are included in its problems are too vast and too complex to admit of any hope of bringing them into order and relation by direct induction. Now, the law of nature, which forms the postulate of a true science of political economy, is not, as has been erroneously assumed, that men are invariably and universally selfish. As a matter of fact, this is not true, nor can we abstract from man all but selfish qualities in order to make as the object of our thought on economic matters what has been called the economic man, without getting what is really a monster, not a man. The law of nature, which is really the postulate of a true science of political economy, is that men always seek to gratify their desires with the least exertion, whether those desires are selfish or unselfish, good or bad. That this is a law of nature, we have the highest possible warrant, wider in fact than we can have for any of the laws of external nature, such as the law of gravitation, for the laws of external nature can be apprehended only objectively. But that it is a law of nature that men seek to gratify their desires with the least exertion, we may see both subjectively and objectively. Since man himself is included in nature, we may subjectively reach the law of nature that men seek to gratify their desires with the least exertion, by an induction derived from consciousness of our own feelings and an analysis of our own motives of action. While objectively, we may also reach the same law by an induction derived from observation of the acts of others. Proceeding from a law of nature thus doubly assured, the proper method of a political economy, which becomes really a science by its correct apprehension of a fundamental law, is the method of deduction from that law, the method of proceeding from the general to the particular. Thus, in the main, the science of political economy resorts to the deductive method, using induction for its tests. But in its more common investigations, its most useful instrument is a form of hypothesis which may be called that of mental or imaginative experiment, by which we may separate, combine, or eliminate conditions in our own imaginations, and thus test the working of known principles. This is the most common method of reasoning, familiar to us all, from our very infancy. It is a great working tool of political economy, and in its use, we have only to be careful as to the validity of what we assume as principles. Chapter 12. Political Economy as Science and Art. There is found among economic writers much dispute not only as to the proper method of political economy, but also as to whether it should be spoken of as a science or as an art. There are some who have styled it a science, and some who speak of it as both science and art. Others, again, make substantially the same division, into abstract or theoretical or speculative political economy, upon the one side, and concrete, normative, or applied political economy on the other side. Into this matter, however, it is hardly worthwhile for us to enter at any length, since the reasons for considering a proper political economy as a science rather than an art have already been given. It is only necessary to observe that where systematized knowledge may be distinguished, as it sometimes is, into two branches, science and art, the proper distinction between them is that one relates to what we call laws of nature, the other to the manner in which we may avail ourselves of these natural laws to attain desired ends. There may be disputes as to whether there is yet a science of political economy, that is to say, whether our knowledge of the natural economic laws is as yet so large and well digested as to merit the title of science. But among those who recognize that the world we live in is in all its spheres governed by law, there can be no dispute as to the possibility of such a science. When we have worked out the science of political economy, when we shall have discovered and related the natural laws which govern the production and distribution of wealth, we shall then be in a position to see the effect of human laws and customs. But it does not seem to me that such knowledge can be properly spoken of as an art of political economy. There is a science of astronomy which has its applications in such arts as those of navigation and surveying, but no art of astronomy, and there is a science of chemistry which has its applications in many arts, but no art of chemistry. And so the science of political economy finds its applications in politics and its various subdivisions, but these applications can hardly be spoken of as constituting an art of political economy. Yet if we choose, as some have done, to speak of political economy as both science and art, then the art of political economy is the art of securing the greatest production and the fairest distribution of wealth. The art whose proper object is to abolish poverty and the fear of poverty, and so lift the poorest and weakest of mankind above the hard struggle to live. For if there be an art of political economy, it must be the noble art that has for its object the benefit of all members of the economic community. But just as when men believed in magic, they held that there was both white magic and black magic, an art which aimed at alleviating suffering and doing good, and an art which sought knowledge for selfish and evil ends. So, in this view, it may be said that there is a white political economy and a black political economy, where a knowledge of the laws of the production and distribution of wealth is used to enrich a few at the expense of the many, or even when a reputed knowledge of those laws is used to bolster up such injustice, and by darkening counsel to prevent or delay the reform of it, such art of political economy, real or reputed, is truly a black art. This is the art of which the great Turgot spoke. For our part, having seen the nature and scope of the science of political economy, for which we adopt the older definition, the science that investigates the nature of wealth and the laws of its production and distribution, let us proceed in this order, endeavoring to discover 1. The nature of wealth, 2. The laws of its production, and then 3. The laws of its distribution. When this is done, we shall have accomplished all that is necessary for a true science of political economy as I understand it.